I just briefly want to talk about the 5, maybe you could call them stages of a logical reasoning question. There's nothing magical about this. It's not like if you didn't know about the 5 stages, oh, you wouldn't do well on the test. It's just a framework for helping you get your mind wrapped around where things are happening as you go through a logical reasoning question. Okay. So here are the 5 stages. Stage 1 is reading the passage, right? Okay, that's step 1 or stage 1. Then when you're done reading the passage, but before you read the question, that's stage 2. There's going to be some evaluation. You're going to need to evaluate what you just read. Then step 3 or stage 3 is the question itself. You have to read what the question says, right? Which one of the following is true and most strengthens the argument above, or something like that. Okay, then stage 4 or step 4, there's not any magical term here, just the space between you reading the question and the 5 answer choices. You're going to want to make a prediction, right? So you're reading the passage, step 1. You're then analyzing the passage, step 2. Step 3, you're then reading the question. And then step 4, you're making a prediction. And then step 5 is finally going through the 5 answer choices and picking an answer. Now, the reason I'm taking a second here to say those 5 stages is not so much that you need to remember that. I just want to hit home I want to hit this idea hard for you so that you understand it, that there's these 2 stages that most people don't even think about that take place between the passage and the question, and then between the question and the 5 answer choices, right? And it's steps or stages that people skip all the time, right? They read the passage like, okay, yeah, I think I get that. They read the question, they're like, okay, I think I understand what it's asking me. Now let me go look for an answer that answers that question. It's a more passive way of attacking logical reasoning or the test in general, because what you're doing is you're sort of reading information and hoping that something pops out at you, right? Like, oh, that makes sense, or that doesn't sound correct, or that does sound correct. Instead, I want you to take a much more proactive stance towards the test. You read the passage, you really try to understand it, you try to make sense of it. Do you understand it on your own terms? If your cousin walked up to you and said, what was that all about? Could you explain it to them in your own words? I ask people to do this all the time in tutoring, right? One-on-one tutoring. I'd say, hey, read the passage. Tell me what it's saying. They read the passage, and then I say, okay, what did that passage say to you? Or what's the point of that passage? What's the author trying to get us to understand? And when someone looks back at the passage and starts rereading the first sentence, that's a big red flag that they didn't really own what the passage was saying. They just kind of passively read it, right? And there's some understanding going on there, but not enough. I want you to read this passage and get what the person is trying to tell you, so then you can look away from the passage, turn toward your cousin, and start explaining it. Like, hey, this idiot just said that there's water on Mars, therefore there must be life on Mars, right? And you can decide about whether or not you think that argument makes sense or is valid or is logical. And so 1, you're telling your cousin what the argument is, but 2, then you're saying why you think it's either good or bad. In this case, I would say it's pretty bad. Just because there's water on Mars doesn't mean there's going to be life on Mars, right? But in any case, the point is that step 1 is really reading and owning and understanding the passage. Become the expert in the room when it comes to that passage. Step 2 is then making sure you have identified whether that's an argument or a set of facts, right? Did you identify that the passage is a set of facts? Okay, great. There's not going to be a whole lot more to do now except determine what else must be true on the basis of those facts. Or did you determine that that passage is an actual argument with a conclusion? If it is an argument with a conclusion, then you need to decide, did the evidence that the author gave me for that conclusion prove that conclusion? If it didn't prove it, then you want to take a moment to identify why. And that's the thing that a lot of people skip, right? They read the passage and then they go right to the question. No, you need to read, understand, and then decide, okay, what's going on here? If it is an argument, then there is a conclusion. Do you think that conclusion is proven? In 95% of the cases that you encounter an argument, the conclusion is not proven. That's a very high standard, right? It doesn't matter if the conclusion is likely to be true given what the evidence said. The question is, does it have to be true? And if it doesn't have to be true, your job is to point out one possible reason why it might not have to be true. And if you can do that, then you're going to get so much better at logical reasoning. And that's the thing that takes people a second to do. And they feel rushed, so they don't take the time to do it. And they say, well, I don't have time to do this on the actual test. I can't sit here and think about what's wrong with this argument because that takes me 30 seconds or that takes me 5 minutes. Okay, it might. You might not be as fast at it right now, but that's why you need to do it, because you get faster at what you do. So if you practice reading arguments, taking the time it takes to understand them, and then deciding why the conclusion isn't necessarily proven, unless it actually is. Sometimes it is. Sometimes I'm sitting there and I'm like, I think this has to be true. If I accept all this evidence as true, then I think that conclusion has to be true. And then I go into the question, fine. But if you think there's a problem, you want to take the time to identify that problem so you get faster at identifying problems. And by the way, too, just a side note here, if you have any attorney friends and you give them, if you give them a logical reasoning question that, they haven't seen the LSAT for ever maybe, and you say, hey, what do you think of this argument? A lot of times they're very good at identifying why the reasoning doesn't prove the conclusion. It kind of illustrates how the test does a decent job of assessing your ability to eventually reason in the way that attorneys often have to reason, right? So if you're struggling with it now, this is a great opportunity to get better at it, because it's not only going to help you with the LSAT, it's also going to help you with law school and then eventually your legal practice. But okay, so step 1, read and understand the argument. Step 2, analyze it. Is the argument proven or not proven? Step 3, read the question. Make sure you understand what the question is asking. Step 4, now that you've read the question, you can make a prediction. If they say, which one of the following, if true, most strengthens the argument above, you want to think about something that would help the argument. And if you've done all the steps in order correctly up to this point, it should be fairly easy to make a prediction. Because if you've identified what's wrong with the argument and they ask you to strengthen that argument, then you just think about, okay, well, this is what the argument was missing. I'd really love an answer that says that, or something along those lines. Now, of course, your prediction is not going to be worded the exact same way the LSAT's going to word it, but it's often, close. Or at least it touches on the same idea. The LSAT tends to be very formal and obnoxious in some ways, but the important point here is that you've predicted the idea or the problem that needs to be fixed. And so then it becomes easier to identify the correct answer. If it's asking you to weaken the argument, same thing. You now know a problem with the argument. So a good weakener would come in there and exploit that weakness. I'd say, oh, by the way, did you ever think about this? Did you ever think about those cases where water existed, but life didn't? That's taking advantage of the weakness in the argument, right? Okay, so you make a prediction, that's step 4, and then finally you go into the answer choices and you're going through them quickly. Now, this is the one thing that I want to emphasize. We're taking our time up front, right? But then when we're going through the answer choices, we're going fairly quickly. Because when you read an answer choice, what are the odds that it's going to be correct? Answer choice A. What are the chances that answer choice A is right? Yeah, 20%, right? Low. Chances are it's going to be wrong. So as you're reading through an answer choice, if anything about it seems fishy or not good enough for what you're looking for, move on. Now, you may move on prematurely in some cases, but the point is that we can actually move quickly through the answer choices if we've done our homework. You may have some cases where you eliminate all 5 and then you have to go back and reevaluate your answer choices. But I'd rather you be in that more aggressive stance where you've made a prediction, you have some idea of what you're looking for, and then you're eliminating the answer choices because they don't pass the sniff test fast enough. So oftentimes you don't have to read. I mean, in most cases, actually, you're not reading the entire answer choice unless it's something that you think might be correct. Because if you think it might be correct, then every word in that answer choice needs to make sense. So for correct answers, you are going to be reading the whole answer. You may read the whole answer for some answers that turn out to be wrong. But anyways, in a lot of cases, you don't have to do that. Sometimes they will all seem wrong to you. That's a good problem to have. That means you're being critical of bad answers, as opposed to the opposite problem where people are like, well, like 2 or 3 of them seem potentially good to me. Well, think of a scale. You're either overly cynical or overly critical, or you're overly lenient. You're overly generous. I'd rather you be on the overly critical side and occasionally knock them all out and then try again than be overly lenient, which is going to mean if you're overly lenient, then that means you're reading wrong answer choices longer than other people, right? If your critical scale is high, if you've tuned it up, 3 or 4 words into an answer choice, you might be like, I'm out of here. This sucks. And you leave. But if your critical scale is like low and you're not very critical, you're going to read more of each wrong answer choice, right? Which is just going to slow you down. Yeah, the steps really quick. I don't want to overcomplicate it. 5 may just be too many, but step 1 is it's just in order. Step 1 is read and understand the passage. Step 2 is analyze the passage before you read the question. Step 3 is to read the question. Step 4 is to make a prediction based on the question you just read. And step 5 is then to go through the answer choices quickly.